hey, if I'm going to die by 30, then I'm going to live the crap out of life until then to make it worth it. And that idea ultimately carried through the rest of my life.
Hi, I'm Jay Ruderman, and welcome to All About Change, a podcast showcasing individuals who leverage the hardships that have been thrown at them to better other people's lives.
I say put mental health first, because if you don't...
This generation of Americans has already had enough.
I stand before you not as an expert, but as a concerned citizen.
Shane Burcaw never set out to have a massive following. When he started making content about living with spinal muscular atrophy, known as SMA, he rapidly gained online attention.
As my blog was getting bigger, I began to meet more and more much older disabled people, both living with my condition and others. And I began to learn from them that a life with a disability need not be a negative or a shameful experience.
He's since written multiple books, founded a landmark nonprofit, and built a YouTube channel with more than 1.5 million followers.
It's a double-edged sword, not to use a cliche, but it's really effective in showing people the reality of disability. On the other hand, yeah, it's a very vulnerable thing to let people into that part of your life, and it opens the door for people to make horrible comments and say, why do you look so weird in your bed? And how could a woman like that ever want to take care of a man like him?
I sat down with Shane to talk about what his journey looked like to get to where he is now.
I was diagnosed at 11 months old, so my whole life I've been disabled, and that's just been the reality of my existence. When my parents found out about my diagnosis, found out that I would be a wheelchair user for my entire life, that, I would need significant physical assistance throughout my life, they obviously were not expecting that, but they made a decision in that moment that disability would not, have a negative impact on my life. They acknowledged it, life was going to be different than we imagined, but we were going to work together and figure out ways to have me live as regular of a life as possible, using adaptations and advocating for myself. I got my first electric wheelchair at the age of 2. So that's like an infant, basically, being handed this 300-pound piece of machinery. Sounds like a horrible idea. But as I was learning kind of how to navigate this newfound freedom I had, at my fingertips, I could now get myself anywhere I wanted to be. But as I was growing up as a child, they really encouraged me to go out in the neighborhood like all the other non-disabled kids and play and make friends and get dirty and get in trouble, although they didn't love that. But they kind of gave me that freedom to figure out for myself how to navigate the world in a wheelchair, rather than something that I see all too often, which is a complete opposite of that, where a parent of a disabled child feels that they need to overly protect, overly monitor, kind of, the classic helicopter parent that you hear about. And I think that ultimately is a disservice to a child, because they feel, so separate and differentiated from the kids around them. My parents were really good at allowing me to go out and explore the world, make friends, make mistakes and learn from them. And, as I got older, they shifted that into helping me advocate for myself. When I was going to school and I needed maybe a new or a different accommodation, it would make sense for my parents to hop on the phone and call the administration and say, hey, Shane needs more time on tests because his arms are getting tired, but instead they encouraged me to get on the phone and call and say, hey, this is what I'm dealing with, and here's why I need to change my accommodation. So they instilled in me ideas of responsibility and self-awareness, communication skills, to be able to explain to the people around me, like, hey, this is my disability, and this is why I use a wheelchair, and here's why you can interact with me, just like you do anyone else.
A phrase prominent in Shane's work, his blog, his nonprofit, is laughing at my nightmare.
That came from learning that humor was a way to disarm people's discomfort with my disability. At a very young age, I began to perceive that other kids and the people around me made assumptions about me based solely on the way that I looked, the fact that I used the wheelchair. And I had to overcome those initial assumptions and judgments by people every day, it seemed. And I found that by making a joke, by having open communication, I could get people, over their own preconceived notions about disability a lot faster.
That humor isn't just for other people's benefit. Shane told me that laughter is a vital part of his own mental health, something else he attributes to his parents.
When you live with a disability, and even when you don't live with a disability, life is inevitably difficult. We all face daily and year-long, lifelong challenges, and humor does not solve any of them. I think that's like the most important headline is like laughing about a problem that you're experiencing isn't going to fix the problem. And that's not the point of it, I don't think, but rather to help you and maybe those around you be in a better headspace to deal with whatever problem you're experiencing in more practical ways. I believe that this mindset of mine came from our family dinner table growing up. Like my mom and my dad and my brother, we would relentlessly make fun of each other each night at dinner. And, we would make fun of the problems we were experiencing, all in a loving, lighthearted way. But it it taught me and my brother that it was okay to laugh about the more vulnerable parts of life. And, like nothing was off limits at the family dinner table. So if you didn't laugh about it, you were the odd one out. And I do think that, if you're able to step back from a problem that you're facing and laugh about it with a friend, uh, you can move forward in a more productive way.
But even with all the love, laughter, and support, Shane said there were still difficult times growing up.
So my disease is progressive, meaning that I get weaker as I get older. And I've always known that, but it wasn't until 8th grade when I really looked that in the eye and realized what it means. I was having trouble chewing my food in 8th grade, which is something that I'd never experienced before. And so I did some Googling of my disability, and it was really the first time I read, you know, scientific descriptions of my disability, and they said that people with my condition generally did not make it to 30 years old. I entered into kind of this, I'll call it a dark stage of my life. I don't want to give the idea that I was depressed or anything like that, but there was always this voice and this idea in the back of my mind that I was going to live a short life and that things were always going to be getting worse and that having a disability was awful. And I began to resent my disability and really hate it. And I did everything in my power to minimize and distance myself from my disability because it was such a negative thing in my head. And there was just a lot of kind of self hatred almost that wasn't properly expressed. It was more, it came out in sarcasm and judgments of other disabled people. And it was just a messy mental time for me. And then I got a little bit older as I was in college and as my blog was getting bigger, I began to meet more and more much older disabled people, both living with my condition and others. And I began to learn from them that a life with a disability need not be a negative or a shameful experience, but rather there are hundreds of thousands of disabled people out here in the world living amazing, successful, happy, adventurous lives who embraced and loved their disability. And this was like a brand new idea for me that you should be like happy and proud to be disabled. In those years ahead that I began to examine a lot of my own, stigmas and misperceptions about disability and questioning them, identifying all of the ableism that I had internalized throughout the years. Today, I'm 31 years old and I love my life living with a disability. I wouldn't have it any other way.
Shane's done a lot of work to rid himself of those internalized stigmas against disability. But old misconceptions still stick around. I asked him what some of the more common ones about SMA are.
I think they're similar to the misconceptions that people have about disability in general. And they are that living a disabled life is inherently negative and sad, less worthy, less valuable than a non-disabled life. And that unfortunately leads to a variety of systemic barriers that we have as institutions in our world today, because for so long we excluded and minimized the value of disabled people.
For many people with disabilities, one of those systematic barriers can keep them from something absolutely vital, medical care. Shane said he was one of the lucky ones.
I was fortunate to grow up in an area where I had access to all the medical care that I needed. All the best hospitals were right there in Philadelphia, all the doctors I needed to see. I had caseworkers that made sure I always had the equipment I need and fought with insurance when they denied the equipment I need. With that being said, I think I'm an outlier in that way. I'm very fortunate and privileged to have grown up that way because, as I got older and met more and more disabled people, I found that that's often not the case.
Another important part of Shane's activism is highlighting the normalcy of his life. One example, his love life.
Hannah was going to college at Carleton in Minnesota, and I had just graduated from college in Pennsylvania, and my first book had just come out. My nonprofit was beginning to grow and help more and more people. And Rainn Wilson, the actor who plays Dwight on The Office, had a production company at the time that was making documentaries about disabled people doing interesting things. And they featured me in one of their episodes. And that episode got pretty big on YouTube. It got like a couple million views. And one night while Hannah was studying, she, opened up YouTube to distract herself, found this video about me, and felt like we had very similar senses of humor, similar hobbies and passions. And she sent me an email out of the blue, just saying, "Hi, like, I saw your video, and we have a lot in common, like, what's up?" You know? I read her email and was instantly captivated by her voice and her, interests and her worldview. And I replied, and I was like, "Hey, like, let's talk and be friends." So we began to text, and then we began to FaceTime, and very quickly, like within a few weeks, we were like, "Oh no, we have feelings for one another. And that's super inconvenient because we're 1,000 miles apart. Thankfully, a few months later, Hannah flew out to Pennsylvania so that we could meet in person. That kicked off 2 years of long distance dating, where thankfully we had many kind of visits in between to keep us sane. At the end of 2 years, Hannah was going into her senior year of college, and I was, established as a writer, and I made the move out to Minnesota so that we could get an apartment together, and that kind of began our life. And today we're married and we live in LA.
Wow. And so you guys have written a book together called Strangers Assume My Girlfriend is My Nurse. What are some of the misconceptions that you and Hannah deal with on a daily basis about your relationship?
There's two main types of misconceptions, and there are the ones that we get online from people that watch our videos, and then ones that we face out in the real world. The real world ones are often not as severe. They're usually kind of silly. Like when people out in public say to Hannah, "Oh, is this your son?" Because they see me and they can't fathom that, a non-disabled woman like Hannah would date a disabled man like me. But then online, it goes a lot further because people are able to hide behind anonymity. They double down on the idea that I could never be married to a woman like Hannah because it's not something that people often experience. Our media has done a pretty bad job so far of portraying disability in a positive and enviable way. You never see the disabled character be the hero or be the one that falls in love and wins the girl or anything like that. So we have all these ideas in our society, that disability is bad, it's ugly, it's something that should be avoided at all costs. And people just say that out loud on the internet to us. They say that we're lying, that, I'm paying Hannah to pretend to be my wife, because obviously it can never be real love. People say that I am ruining Hannah's life, that, by being with me, I'm holding her back, and that she'll never be able to live a full life. It's all wrong, and it's all based in inexperience, and even a willing, a meaningful or purposeful ignorance and a unwillingness to open up a worldview that maybe you haven't considered before. So yeah, it's a lot. There are a lot of misconceptions about disability and dating and romance and all of that. We've been doing this together now for 6 years, making videos, that is, and we've gotten good at separating kind of our advocacy and our online work from our life. In the beginning, we had the camera on almost all the time. We were filming as much as we could because it was reaching people and we wanted to share our lives and combat those negative ideas that are out there. As we've gotten older, as our channel has kind of matured and come into its own, we've realized that we don't need to share every minute of our life in order to affect the same change. So we're a lot more mindful and purposeful now about having a private life outside of our work.
All right, next Shane puts on his shoes in bed just because it's easier. I find it easier to put them on here than I do in his chair.
My toes bend as Hannah puts them in.
Just his big toe, I have to repeatedly push it straight so it doesn't snag.
Or so it doesn't snap off.
Snap off.
Like a thin little tree branch.
Uh-huh.
All right, shoes are on. We're flying through this.
I know, ready for our day. Next, I prepare Shane's chair for him.
It's a double-edged sword, not to use a cliche, but it's really effective in showing people the reality of disability. If we and others don't make that type of content, then millions of people don't have experience with what a morning routine for a disabled person who is married might look like. And if you don't have experience with it, you're left to believe whatever the media is telling you. And again, all those stories are often very negative. In that way, it's super effective to show people that, and that's why we do it. On the other hand, yeah, it's a very vulnerable thing to let people into that part of your life, and it opens the door for people to make horrible comments and say, "Why do you look so weird in your bed?" And how could a woman like that ever want to take care of a man like him? So it's tough on the other hand, but
Right.
I do think it's ultimately worth it.
But Shane's activism and advocacy for the disability community go beyond shining a light on his personal life.
SMA My Way is a program sponsored by Genentech, who is the pharmaceutical company that makes the drug that I am on for SMA. And basically, the purpose of SMA My Way is to give a platform to people with SMA and their loved ones to show the world kind of what we're capable of and what living a life with SMA is really like. And so every year, we being a group of advocates with SMA get together and we dream big about like what could we do to show the world a different perspective of SMA? We've made a song with an awesome performer named James Ian who has SMA. We did a fashion show during New York Fashion Week. Never thought I would be a model during New York Fashion Week, but here we are. And then just recently we did a comedic musical, a musical comedy called Most Likely Not To. And Hannah and I had the opportunity to help write that musical. We did have a small cameo role. I will not say that we starred in it. There were other much better actors that starred than us. It's a great program, and again, um, it allows us to dream big about ways to show the world what having SMA is really like.
So I also want to talk about, you've written a lot of books, but a children's book that you wrote called Not So Different, which talks about a person living with disability. And I think the book is great because kids have a lot of questions about the world. And how do you talk to kids about the issue of disability? And what do you wish that kids knew about
Yeah.
disability when they're growing up?
Yeah. So I've done hundreds of presentations to schools all around the country. And what I've learned is that, as you said, kids are so curious and innocent when it comes to disability. Like, they just want to know how I get in bed or what my favorite video game is. But often, out in the real world, that curiosity is met with discipline. You know, if they ask a disabled person out in public, like, why do you look the way that you do? Which is something that I get all the time. Often the parents will say, no, 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 like, don't do that. And then they shush them away. And now the kid has this feeling like, oh, disability is taboo and it's something I shouldn't talk about. That is not a helpful way to have a kid learn about disability. And so I think it's important to embrace their curiosity, realize that it's not intended to be harmful or mean or anything like that. They just want to learn. And so I meet them head on wherever they are, and I try to explain whatever they're curious about in a fun way, and then make it relatable. Like, they are also kids that love sports and video games and climbing trees, and I can relate to all that. Well, maybe not climbing trees, but one of my favorite things is like when a kid asks, like, who's your favorite football team? And I say, oh, the Philadelphia Eagles. And they all go, oh my God, I love the Eagles too. You know, they never realize that, like, oh, we can connect and like we have things in common.
What's your advice on how parents and teachers should be talking to kids about people with disabilities?
Yeah, I think it's important to frame disability not as a negative thing, not as what disabled people can't do, So, if you're explaining why someone using the wheelchair, rather than saying that's because they can't walk, maybe you say, oh, that wheelchair helps them move around. Always be mindful to frame disability and accessibility devices as positive things. We all live different lives and we're all different in a variety of ways, and that's not a bad thing. It's just a thing. And I think that the sooner kids realize that being different in a physical sense isn't a bad thing, the better.
Much of Shane's advocacy work is made possible through his nonprofit, Laughing at My Nightmare.
Yeah, so I co-founded Laughing at My Nightmare when I was a sophomore in college, right around the time that my blog was getting pretty big, and I had an audience suddenly, and I wanted to use that audience for good. In the beginning, we focused solely on providing adaptive and medical equipment to people with disabilities. And that again came from my own experiences of always having everything I needed, but being very aware that I was very privileged in that way. So to date, that was 12 years ago, we've given over $1 million in adaptive and medical equipment, everything from accessible vehicles to communication devices, everything in between. And another new program that we're doing is providing scholarships to people with disabilities seeking higher education. This is our first year doing that, and we are about to announce our first awardees. So it's a big kind of moment for us at Laughing at My Nightmare. But, in everything that we do, it's just important to me to make the world a more equitable place for people with disabilities and to, help even that playing field in ways that are really important. People should not have to go without the devices that allow them to be comfortable and happy and productive. We provided a adaptive tricycle in our last round to a little boy who wanted to be out with his brother and friends riding around, but couldn't do it on a regular bike, and his family didn't have the funds to afford a much more expensive adaptive bike. And so, we provided that, and seeing the videos of him playing with his friends was, awesome.
It's amazing.
Those adaptive devices are so expensive, and until we can change that, we're going to need organizations like ours and yours to help and make the world more equitable for people with disabilities.
So how do people get involved? Let's say people want to contribute. Where should they go to find the
So
organization?
you can go to laughingatmynightmare.com. Obviously, your donations are much appreciated, and they go directly to providing all of that equipment that I said. We only have one full-time employee, so our overhead is extremely low. And we also have an annual 5K that is virtual, so you can do it from wherever you live, and you don't even have to run the whole 5K if you don't want to. You can sign up for that online now at our website. But yeah, we'd love to also have you apply if you're a person living with a disability and there are items that you need that would help you live a more comfortable or productive or healthy life. Please apply. We have application windows open all throughout the year at various times. So I would encourage you to apply if that is relevant to you.
In light of Mental Health Awareness Month, I want to get a bit more insight into what Shane does to take care of himself in the face of the uphill battle for education.
It gets me down some days. When I read the 10th comment that day telling me that, I shouldn't be alive, it's tough at times. But I also use it as motivation. Each of those horrible comments is a person out there in the world who ultimately can change their mind and update their view on disability. We've had a handful of messages over the years that we've been doing this from people who left nasty, horrible comments saying, hey, like, I used to have some pretty awful views on disability and I was mean to you guys. But the more I watched your videos, the more I like began to question why I felt that way and why I had those assumptions. And now I regret feeling that way and thinking that way. And I realize the disability and living with a disability is not the idea that I had in my mind. For an internet troll, if you will, to reach out voluntarily and say, hey, like, I take back what I said, like, thank you, that is unheard of. And those are the moments that, like, keep me going when I'm feeling overwhelmed by all the negativity. It's like people can change and they can improve their mindset. So if we can reach them, we should.
Ultimately, much of Shane's life philosophy boils down to something pretty simple.
I believe that we have one life to live and that making the most of it is important because I don't want to come to the end of my time here and be like, oh, I wasted that. Now it's over. Facing your own mortality is ultimately what helped me develop this mindset. And that's not something that everyone gets to experience. Highly recommend it if you've never looked your own mortality in the eye. But I had to do that when I was in 8th grade and in the years that followed, and I learned what was then like the diet or the prognosis for my disease. And it helped me just realize like, hey, if I'm gonna die by 30, then I'm gonna live the crap out of life until then to make it worth it. And that idea ultimately carried through the rest of my life.
Yeah, that's a great message. Is there anything you're working toward now? Any goals that you have that you could talk about over the next, coming months and years?
Yeah, so with our nonprofit, Lafayette My Nightmare, we're always trying to, raise more money so we can help more people. This year we're launching our scholarship program and we hope to provide full rides for 1 to 2 individuals. Next year, I hope that number is 2 to 4, and then next year, 10. I just want to help more people. Personally, Hannah and I are writing a book together that comes out this year. We've been working on it for 4 years now, called Interabled, and it is a collection of love stories, both from our own life and the lives of a amazing group of couples that we had the privilege of interviewing for the book. And I'm biased because I wrote it, but it's a really beautiful book that shows all the diversity and joy and love in relationships that involve disability. So that will be out later this year, wherever books are sold, and I hope that everyone checks it out.
Well, I wish you a lot of success. And Shane, thank you so much for all you do, for your activism, for changing our world. And thank you for being my guest on All About Change.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me.
Shane is tackling the goal of making the world a more accessible place in a multitude of ways, with his tireless dedication behind each one. I wish him to go from strength to strength. That's it for today's episode. Join us 2 weeks from today for my talk with child welfare advocate and former judge Ron E. Richter. Today's episode was produced by Rebecca Chasson, with story editing by Yochai Metal and Mijan Zulu. To check out more episodes or to learn more about the show, you can visit our website, allaboutchangepodcast.com. If you like our show, spread the word, tell a friend or family member, or leave us a review on your favorite podcasting app. We'd really appreciate it. All About Change is produced by the Ruderman Family Foundation in partnership with Pod People. That's all for now. I'm Jay Ruderman, and we'll see you next time on All About Change.
Au revoir, but not goodbye.